Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name's Yeshe Smith. I'm the Programs and Partnerships Manager at the Institute for Human Security and Social Change. I'm nominally chairing the panel today, but my only function really is to introduce our panelists and to funnel some questions to them in the second half of the hour. I'm joining you from Wurundjeri country, and we are lucky to have two handsome gentlemen and two lovely ladies joining us from Fiji and New Zealand, respectively, to talk to us about the tenuous silver lining of COVID and what happens when the expats, the white people, the internationals go home. The reason I'm here is that we at the Institute have been having an ongoing conversation with Pacific colleagues about these issues, many of whom we have long-standing relationships with. And today's a chance for us to hear from those Pacific colleagues on their perspectives on what's happened over the last year and what they've learned from that. We've got 4 people joining us who've got a real depth and breadth of experience working on development programming in the Pacific across regional organisations, donor-funded programs, multilaterals and NGOs. So it's a real privilege to have the benefit of their experience and insight today. Peni Tawake is a development practitioner and accredited partnership broker with over 15 years of experience working across the Pacific. Peni, gives a wave. There he is. He's worked with a particular focus on Samoa, Solomon Islands, Tonga and Vanuatu. Peni has brokered, managed and supported bilateral and multilateral partnerships across a range of programs at national, local and regional levels. A significant part of his support to partnerships and reform coalitions has involved utilising tools and approaches, political economy analysis, thinking and working politically, partnership brokering, adaptive leadership training to inform contextual analysis, guide ways of working and facilitate reflection and planning. His most recent role was as Partnerships and Coalitions Manager with DPAT's Australia Pacific Training Coalition. He's currently a full-time consultant, providing services in partnership brokering, strategic and advisory support. So thanks for joining us, Peni. Mariani gives a wave. Mariani Rokovucago is the Executive Director for Balance of Power, and some of you may have been lucky enough to see her presenting on another panel yesterday, so she's a frequent flyer at RDI this year. Balance of Power is an Australian government supported initiative that aims to increase women's agency and leadership in decision-making in the Pacific, particularly in the political sphere. Prior to joining BOP, Mariani was based in Honiara, working for the Australia Solomon Islands Resource Facility as Manager for Monitoring and the Monitoring and Evaluation Unit. She's been working in the region on various development programs for more than a decade. Outside of work, Mariani is heavily involved in her community development projects and initiatives. As an advisor to her village youth group, a member of Tailevu Provincial Development Committee, and a member of Sogo Sogo Vakamorana Itake, a registered NGO for Indigenous Fijian Itake women. Thank you for joining us, Mariani. Lavenia Rokovucago, give us a wave, Lavenia. There she is. She's currently an independent consultant working in governance and stakeholder engagement. Before her life as an independent, she worked with an international organisation on a DFAT-funded regional project for 3 years. Prior to that, she worked with the Fiji government for more than 15 years in various roles. And invaluable experiences there included managing whole of government civil service reform programs, being part of a diplomatic team in New York, supported Fiji's chairmanship of the Group of 77 in 2013, and serving in Fiji's High Commission in London for 3 years. And outside of work, Lavenia supports Pacific Youth Chants, the same organisation as Mariani, Sogo Sogo Vakamorana, and her Provincial Development Advisory Group, and also she's working on a village conservation project. And last but most definitely not least, Alfred, give us a wave. Alfred Schuster brings over 20 years Pacific regional and national development experience with emphasis on facilitating and monitoring political coalitions, strategic engagement and Pacific advocacy, and donor reporting and review on the effectiveness of donor engagement and practice in the Pacific. He's worked in Samoa, New Zealand and Fiji, including with the Prime Minister's Department in Samoa, UN Population Fund and Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat in Fiji. He served on the board of Transparency International New Zealand and recently was the Pacific's representative on the steering committee of the Global Partnership for Effective Development Corporation. And Alfred is a national of both Samoa and New Zealand, and he is currently looking for a job on the market. So I hope you can see that there's an enormous depth and breadth, wealth of experience here of engaging with development in the Pacific. I'm going to hand over to these guys now. Our plan is they'll each speak for about 5 minutes, and then the full second half hour will be left for questions so we can engage with all of you. So over to our first speaker, Alfred.
Thank you, Yeshe, and Talofalava to everyone. I'm going to provide some very personal thoughts based on personal experience and observation. So they may not pass the test of academic rigor, but I'm hoping that my 15 years of plus 15 years of development experience in the Pacific might count for something. So the question we've been asked is, do Pacific Islanders lead when expatriates go home, and particularly in the context of COVID and the restrictions that it's that it's brought. So the first point I want to make is to draw a very clear line of separation and definition as to which or what expatriate are we talking about. And I think you'll see from the experience that this group of panelists provide that we are all expatriates. We are all external to locality in the work that we do. You know, I'm an expatriate. I'm a Pacific expatriate. I am from Samoa. I'm currently residing in New Zealand and have worked for so many years in Fiji. But that's not the expatriate that I want to draw attention to. So while we are all expatriates by virtue of being external to our locality, it's the expatriate that's external to context that I want to draw attention to. And that expatriate normally manifests by their presence in the Pacific being time-bound. They bring a very specific set of skills to achieve very specified tasks. And normally it's transacted with very little time spent to recognize, acknowledge, and understand Pacific national or regional context. They're also the expatriate that's normally brought in to positions of technical or administrative and financial leadership. And they are also deemed to be the expert in their field, and especially the expert in where they are from. So when you combine this position of leadership and expertise, you know, they can wield quite significant amounts of power when it comes to decision making, setting strategic direction, and also delivery of particular aid projects and programs. But they are also the same expatriate who are citizens of the donor country. And so they are brought in by donors, donor countries, into positions that are normally reserved for them. And the way that that normally manifests is that either certain credentials, certain areas of work or qualifications that are used within the position description can only be found within the donor country. So against that definition of the expatriate, the second point I want to make is then to provide an answer to that question. Do Pacific Islanders lead when expatriates go home? My simple answer to that is no, because against that description of expatriate that is current and common in the Pacific, they contribute to what I would call structural barriers that disable, disempower, and somewhat undervalue Pacific capability and expertise to lead, influence, facilitate, and access those same levels of power in decision making, in program design, and so forth. And a large part of that is because sometimes, and most times, that expatriate finds real difficulty in recognizing the importance of investing time in building relationships, in building rapport, and understanding and appreciating Pacific development concepts like reciprocity, like one soul wara, this notion of unity and within diversity, or community, accountability, all of these Pacific development concepts that sometimes we don't find in program design and implementation. But yet we know that there is this heavy reliance on Pacific nationals to do that part of the work. And they rely heavily on the social and political capital, the cultural intelligence that Pacific nationals bring to an aid project to build the rapport, to build the networks, and in most cases, in their name, in the name of the expatriate or in the name of the donor program. And so we find this idea of trying to reconcile cultural intelligence and Pacific concepts missing or lacking in framing technical and administrative practice and in the working arrangements of the aid program or the aid project. So the last point I want to make against this question is to now flip that previous answer of no on its head. And if you were to ask me then whether Pacific Islanders lead when expatriates leave, my response to that, against the examples I've just mentioned, is that Pacific Islanders lead anyway, whether expatriates are in the country or not. And it manifests in those things that I've just mentioned around social political capital, cultural intelligence, their immersion within the social, cultural, political context, and their willingness and desire to do so, and not just confined within the working hours of that particular aid program and aid project, but also outside of that. And I think you'll see from some of the experiences or community engagement that Lavenia and Marioni engage in, those are the examples of embedding themselves within those social and cultural contexts as part of building their own understanding of how to bring that understanding into aid projects and aid program. And so what you find then is that the value of Pacific capability, expertise, and leadership is very much defined and applied based on the extent within which the expatriate themselves understand its usefulness and its utility in the delivery of development investments. Which brings me back to this point, this idea of being external to context, or bringing this external to context perspective. And so to conclude, the question for me is never one of locality or location, or whether expatriates are in the country or not. It is whether they are aware of that context, of that Pacific regional and development context. Because my experience tells me that understanding of Pacific context is central to the rollout of good practice, good development practice. It is a central driver to knowing ways of doing, and importantly, it's a central driver to creating the structural arrangements that value and embed Pacific ways of doing within working procedures and management arrangements, and particularly within the hierarchies of the leadership within donor programs and projects. Because we all know, as development practitioners and those of us that have worked in aid programs, is that location is not a factor when you're designing an aid program in a foreign capital, or you're framing the policy and political drivers that informs the priority areas of donor assistance. It's in the understanding of context. And where you find that are in the Pacific nationals and Pacific expatriates, while they may be foreign to locality, are not foreign to context. So I'm just going to park it there for now and pass on to my other colleagues, and I'm open to any questions later. Start.
Yeshe, shall I just go ahead? Hello, everyone. Thank you. Just hello, everyone. Just following on from what Alfred shared, and I just wanted to say, as Pacific Islanders, even as expatriates in the Pacific, we are very much a part of the context. Yeah? And like Alfred was saying, because of our connection to each other, to being part of the Pacific, it often means that we go beyond what is prescribed in our terms of reference or our position descriptions, particularly when it comes to managing the relationships with partners, with stakeholders, and our Pacific government focal points, civil society. I refer to this because during COVID and in the absence of international staff, I found myself going out of my way to keep the conversations going with our local partners. Because I valued these relationships, it was not because I was required to do so, but everyone was kind of wondering what was going on. So I was personally vested into these relationships, and I kept on reaching out to the partners. I was often reminded that although this was good, it wasn't a core part of my terms of reference. But somehow there was always an expectation on me to initiate those partnerships and those personal, which was really based on personal relationships. As I reflect on my experience, I feel like it's really a missed opportunity that there is just not enough investment into the local leadership of Pacific Islanders. Because after all, and if anything, COVID has shown us that we are the only constants in this changing of projects, project managers, and as expatriates move on to other international assignments, we are the constants that remain, that liaise with these focal points, and we have established trust relationships to the point that they often prefer to work with us because they know us. And so these relationships that have been built over the years, we will take with us regardless of the organization that we work for. And so I always had this challenge, like Alfred was talking about, because of the cultural complexities, the nuances of having to navigate in relationships, but it was just not seen as a core part of my work, even though that was what I was actually doing. And now that I reflect, when I look at the organization, it is probably also predominantly that locals are brought in to support international staff. So it's on that, guys, that you are there to support the international expert. And so all of it, the so-called technical expertise, is based on that subject matter without the complexities of the context, which just seems to be, it's not explicitly discussed. On that note, like moving forward, and I think that is really the value of this kind of conversations, is to see, where can we make improvements, and where, if we have the opportunity to do so, what changes can we make. And I think in recognizing, like I mentioned, I really felt like the relationships is something that's so important, but not enough attention is given to it. And now, in the absence of international staff, the continuity of initiatives would really depend on that recognition of the value that Pacific Islanders and the relationships that we have with each other, that we bring into these jobs. And like Alfred mentioned, a lot of these go beyond professional relationships. And a lot of the excess that we have is not because of our professional capacity, but because of the work we do outside of these jobs that allow us to engage with some of the very key people, even within the country. In one meeting, we could be sitting right next to a certain person that they would have been trying to get access to otherwise, but these are based on personal relationships. And because of that, I think my point is that recognition that first needs to happen, because without these personal relationships, the professional relationships won't happen, the partnerships won't happen. It's based on that trust relationship that has been established over the years. And I guess from my end is really hoping to see, like Alfred, I feel like it's still, we don't see the explicit mention of Pacific leadership in some of these organizations. The opportunity rests, even though structurally as an organization, there's no explicit mention of Pacific leadership. It's always about the context in which we work in and the people, or the so-called recipients or the beneficiaries of the work we do, that has to develop that local capacity. But for the sake of continuity, we really need to pay more attention because of the constant that I mentioned, the local people within the organization that will remain whether expats are here or not. And these are the connections, the relationships that will actually move these initiatives forward. And so we hope to see the donors, even international staff that come into working in the Pacific context. It's really to recognize the value of these relationships that we have really outside of our professional, our jobs, so to speak. And if that can also really be part of the technical expertise and also be recognizing that, because that is how we are going to move a lot of these initiatives forward. So I think that's really from me, is that personal relationships that we have to be recognized as part of that so-called technical expertise, because we have that understanding of the local context. Whichever initiative, whichever program it is, it may have worked in another country, but it doesn't mean it's going to work here because of the other nuances that come into the context. I'll leave it at that, and then we can continue. I'm mindful of the time. Thank you.
Over to Peni.
Thanks, Yeshe, and thanks, Alfred and Lavenia. I'd like to start by just sharing an anecdote from when I worked at the Australia Pacific Training Coalition, APDC. We had a leadership team retreat, and we were asked to define what we thought was the purpose of the program. When everyone shared their answers, it turned out that all of the Pacific Island nationals, for us, first and foremost, we thought the purpose of the program was for improving development outcomes for Pacific people. For a lot of the white people, or the expats in the room, the other expats in the room, it was about ensuring reporting was done accurately, on time, for DFAT. I think, and based on that and what Lavenia and Alfred have shared, I think already you can see that very clearly for Pacific Islanders, for many of us, the work that we're doing in the development sector isn't just work, it's our passion. And that's really the reason that we do this work as well. In responding to the question about whether Pacific Islanders lead when the expats go home, I think my key message really is that the leadership does happen, but that change needs to happen on a number of levels. So how have we led during COVID? For me, it's been understanding that there's been a greater degree of autonomy and innovation in the programs that I've worked in. So staff can be given more opportunities to lead, particularly at the national level, without daily oversight or micromanagement by their managers. An example for me has been a staff in PNG who had been having trouble getting traction on the work, as well as having the trust in her capacity by her manager. In his absence, without having someone peering over her shoulder, micromanaging her, doubting her capacity, she really did amazingly in the work. So we had space to, and we also encouraged our staff reporting to us to innovate, to engage in independently facilitated meetings with our remote support, to lead on stakeholder meetings, to lead on developing and managing partnerships. And I saw this as well with other staff who, in other countries, also really capitalized on that opportunity. Previously, what had limited this autonomy and innovation, organizational structures that reinforced the notion of Pacific Islanders being support staff, and that, as Alfred said, international staff, the technical experts. There's also the somewhat tokenistic engagement or consultation with staff. Additionally, what else has happened has been there's an increase in contextualized ways of working. So 2020 was really an opportunity for local staff to really look at more contextualized ways of working and really using the local language, delivering it in culturally appropriate ways, using and observing cultural protocols. So similar to what Lavenia said about really having the contextual and cultural knowledge and nuances. And for me, this really also speaks to, this contextualized way of working also speaks to the valuing of personal relationships and how these contributed to achievement of program outcomes. The second question, if we're asking, what can be retained or what can we ensure that we keep in place? I think there are a number of things that we can do. Some of those are structural and some are behavioral. If you're talking about what structural things need to be put in place, I would echo both Alfred and Lavenia to say that we need to really be thinking about how you recruit Pacific Islanders who are Pacific Island specialists. So real deliberate and conscious valuing of Pacific expertise that results in the recruitment of Pacific development specialists into management positions. I was privileged at APDC to work with a cohort of Pacific Island colleagues who brought skills in strategic engagement, policy expertise, communications, partnership brokering. It really felt like a Pacific powerhouse and a really valuable experiment in how the work, when it's contextualized, is more sustainable. And so for me, it's also about moving away from that reliance of development programs and organizations on international or non-Pacific staff to bring that technical expertise. Behavioral change that needs to happen is a real substantive engagement versus a tokenistic engagement. We can see in a lot of meetings that sometimes Pacific Islanders seem to be a token brown face at the table. So I would say that if you're going to be discussing development in the Pacific, you need to be drawing on local expertise and have Pacific Islanders in the room or at the table to contribute to how these programs are designed and shaped. A second thing is, in the Pacific, we all know that silence is an assent if you're in a meeting. I think the mistake can be that, if someone who's facilitating a meeting is to ask people, are there any questions? We've all seen this. And often when there's no questions, we move on. I think, if you're talking about the nuances of Pacific cultures, it's about recognizing that silence is an assent. I would also say that, picking up on the point that Lavenia made, that, these agreements that we have between organizations, obviously they're between organizations, but the way they're operationalized is really between people. And so we really need to be valuing the relationships that Pacific Islanders bring when they join your organizations. So really being able to unpack that and capitalize on that, but in a way that's not exploitative. Finally, I'd like to just talk about, we quite often talk about local staff exercising agency, but that presupposes that the work environment allows for that agency. And so we need to be really, or organizations and development partners really need to be looking at how to make spaces to build trust. I think the first step is recruiting senior Pacific Islanders, which is a point I spoke to earlier, but also providing an enabling environment for learning and making mistakes, recognizing that making mistakes or failing can lead to innovation. I've seen in development that in some organizations, it's okay for white people to fail, but if a local staff fails, that's a permanent mark on their career. So we really need to be looking at how you provide space for people to feel safe to fail. And one of the ways of ensuring that there's a safety to fail is also ensuring that there's a well-articulated risk mitigation strategy. And finally, I think the last point I'd like to make about changes that need to happen is that also that, in the same way that, if you're looking at the Black Lives Movement across the US, you don't always need a Black person to be talking about how you make a more equitable society for African Americans. In the same way, I would encourage you to talk about it amongst yourselves. Pacific Islanders don't always need to be in the room for discussions about how systemic change needs to happen to increase the substantive participation of Pacific people in development. Thank you, Yeshe.
Thanks, Peni. Mbula, everyone. My talk this afternoon will be slightly different from Alfred, Peni, and Lavenia, because the program that I work for, that was designed in 2019, was already set up to provide and support local level leadership. The Balance of Power is also an Australian government initiative that has been set up to provide support to women's leadership, with particular focus on political leadership. Just to backtrack a bit, the design team had done a thorough consultation with a couple of stakeholders across the region to look at what can we do differently if we are to make shifts in this area of women in political leadership. Based on that, the understanding is that there needs to be some, shifts in the culture and customs, social norm change. For that to happen, it'll need local actors, local leaders to be driving conversations, to be leading the team that will need to work in that space, which is basically why there was that intentional that Peni talked about earlier. You've got to be intentional in terms of the structures to be selecting people with the right, I guess, working the right people for those types of sensitive work that need to then make these changes that we all have been struggling to do to sort of increase women in local leadership, because it will involve a lot of sensitive conversations. So for balance of power, we were already structured and set up that way. We have a team of local leaders based in the countries that we operated in, Tonga and in Vanuatu, and I'm based here in Suva. So when Yeshe did her calls last year to say, you know, how is this affecting you? And I had to say, Yeshe, I think we were already a step ahead of the game. We were already set up this way. But that's not to say that we have it all figured out. No, there's still teething problems. We're still learning how we're going to do this better. And I think I just wanted to also share that as we support this whole ways of working where we are putting local leaders or recruiting them to be leading in these different initiatives, programs, the valuable support of external players. You know, there needs to be that combination of support, the collaboration, that we are in this together as partners. So it's even tagging it or framing it as experts or SDAs, advisors. We had to think about reframing all that, because our roles are there to we are there to complement one another. So for me, it had to come down to that changing, reframing, rethinking, even those taglines, the things that automatically just offsets the power balance and the dynamics when you walk into a room or when we're having conversations. So for Jennifer, our director for strategy and planning and programs, we had to, we needed to still have the support of the external players. We have a good group of good team of partners that are there to support us. You know, Peni talked about the need to, you know, take some calculated risks, be there to accompany the local leaders, be prepared that we will make some mistakes, but then you're there. And I remember when I used to work for my previous job at Pacific Leadership Program, we wouldn't want to call it failures. We would say, oh, it's just a learning. It made us feel better. So it was okay that you'd make a mistake and fail, because the expectations are really high. They set the bar quite high, and quite often it takes a lot of stress on us. So moving forward, for this to be effective, there needs to be that ongoing reflection to really work on the ways of working. How do we work together? And we don't have the answers to this, and we cannot draw up a toolkit to say this has worked there, then it might work here. No, it's for us with balance of power. It's something that we talk about regularly. It's part of our 6-monthly reflection as well. So, and you know, it also helps to build a trust. And it's done in a respectful way. And I think that's the only way that we can really, if we're all about supporting local leadership, it's about that. It's not about somebody sitting somewhere halfway across the globe and remote controlling and telling you, no, you're not allowed to say this, or no, you're not supposed to talk to that one. No, you've got to put the red kangaroo here. And for us, it's been great, because we've had to have those negotiations with our donors, and we've been fortunate that they've been very supportive of that, allowing us to have that bit of space, flexibility, to push through local level leadership, because it needs to be seen as, you know, that it's locally owned, that trust building exercise. Sometimes we are seen as outsiders and just doing work for the donors. So it's changing that perception as well. That needs to happen. And I think one of the things that that has come up. Penny had shared it, and so has Lavenia. The need for us to value the skills, the unique skills of our local leaders. This whole thinking and working politically, it's very subtle, and you sometimes cannot see it. But just to give them that space to value it is part of a key skills that will need when we are supporting local leaders. I think I'll stop there, Yeshe. I'm just conscious of time, so we can have a bit more discussion.
All right, so let's get into some questions. We've got one question so far in the Q&A. Question to all the panelists. Is the perception true that the local people don't have the same trust in the technical authority of the local to lead as compared to the expat? So it seems, are you finding that it's your colleagues, your Pacific colleagues that perhaps at times are prioritizing the knowledge and experience of the expats over their own local colleagues?
I might take a stab at this first, Yeshe. I think that's a really good question. And for me, it's that devaluing the local expertise and valuing the external expertise. It really speaks to me about the need to decolonize the mind. We've been conditioned, and our parents and their parents have been conditioned to, that the white man is the one who brings all the expertise, who they brought Christianity, and all this is, it's all meshed up into this, what we have now, where Pacific people inevitably lean towards white expertise to tell us what to do. But when we have another person who looks like us tell us the same thing, there's still that lack of trust. And so I think there really needs to be a journey that needs to be made internally within people to say that the expertise that local people bring, who have the same qualifications, expertise, experience as international people or non-Pacific Islanders, is just as valid. And one of the ways of doing that I found has been to really push ourselves into those spaces to engage in the practice of leadership. I found that in PNG, I'm going to use the PNG example again, with a staff member I had there wasn't much faith in her ability to do her job. I think there was a degree of white anting from some colleagues as well as some experienced managers, but that in some cases she had to just push herself into spaces to prove people wrong. And I think that conscious pushing into space needs to happen, but there's also an internal journey that needs to happen with people to also really unpack, why do we keep privileging the opinion of a white person over a Pacific Islander? I think that's part of the problem.
Anyone else on the panel want to comment on that particular question?
Yeah, I'll have a go. I think it also speaks to, just building on Penny's point, it also speaks to the value that that is given to what Pacific expertise and capability brings. And so, those things that I talked about earlier, the social and political capital, even the technical leadership on a whole raft of issues that, ranging from climate change, fisheries, to strategic engagement, partnerships and coalitions and things like that. So it's recognizing the value and understanding that, that there is value in what Pacific Islanders bring. But sometimes that value can only be recognized if it's situated within a particular working arrangement or program design. I think that's where we find program designs deficient, because we don't see those qualities of leadership that Pacific Islanders bring around social and political capital or technical leadership. And bringing it back to the point I said earlier, is a lot of the positions of executive leadership or technical capability are framed in a way that leaves little room or opportunity for Pacific Islanders to access and demonstrate the value that they bring at that level of engagement and expertise. And so I think that's, again, recognition, decolonizing the mind, institutionalizing these qualities and these concepts and capabilities that Pacific people bring to the development process.
I might put a question to you guys. I interviewed, I think, 14 people last year, like yourselves, highly experienced Pacific professionals working in international development, about what happened and is continuing to happen with the COVID emergency. And there were two things that I thought were really interesting. One was so Peni brought up that systemic and behavioural elements. So there were systemic elements that were really shocking, with people talking about the fact that local staff were monitored, local staff were required to fill in timesheets where expatriate staff weren't, very different systems for addressing the way international and Pacifica people worked during the COVID space. And also there was all this language that was repeatedly used by people about what a relief it was to not be hovered over or watched, monitored. It was a real sense of oppression, the kind of language that people used. Mariani, I know it's different for you because, as you said, you're in a program that's being very much led by Pacific people. But I was just really curious about that, the use of that language, of this oppressive sense of being watched over, monitored, hovered, micromanaged. And those were two really stark things that came up repeatedly, this very different systemic stuff and then this behavioural stuff that people were kind of relieved of in the absence of expats. I don't know exactly what I want to say about either of those. I guess I'm just curious about whether you have reflections on either of those elements of what happened when so many of the international or white staff went home over the last year, the different systems and the behavioural, the freedom from certain behaviours. La or Mariani?
Sure, I'll take that one, Yeshe. I did really feel that sort of a difference, and despite the absence, this constant, we were actually, and I feel really speaking to trust, like where the accountability aspect, where we didn't see international staff having, even though they were not physically located here, not having to account for their time. It was really different for us. We had to go have Zoom meetings every day to report. And I think sometimes it was, even we used to joke about it amongst colleagues and said, okay, same thing as I was doing yesterday. Yeah? And that was what we have to keep on saying. And it feels a bit patronizing, really, because you would think that if you've been given a task, you'll only have something to report when you've actually made some substantive progress, and not having to say, like, how much can you actually say is an update if you're giving an update every day. Yeah? So I think that was definitely something that I experienced. And again, I feel it just speaks to the lack of trust and not recognizing that you don't have to be physically monitored to be able to deliver, because we know exactly what we have to deliver, and we don't have to be constantly reminded of those tasks on a daily basis.
Any other thoughts on that one before we move on to the next question? Mariani, there's a question here directly to you. Mariani, if I may ask you to speak to your observations on failure and the high expectations of donors and partners, do you feel there's growing space to acknowledge failure in the sector? Is the discussion around learning from failure in the sector leading to practical uptake among staff working on the ground?
That's a loaded question. Thank you. In terms of speak to observations and failure, I think I'll just share a story in terms of this idea of failure. I know of a particular program, I won't mention the country, but they had selected, they've always had the team leader to be an expat. And then I think 2 or 3 years ago, elected a local person who's qualified, met all the criteria. So he was appointed team leader. And then I think a year or two went by, and of course there was some, he made a couple of mistakes, but then it wasn't entirely him. There were other things, and there were those systemic things that needed to be amended or changed. And he immediately was dismissed. And they've re-advertised the position, and they've made the decision that they'll just give it to an expat, because they had given it for the first time to a local, and he made mistakes, and that's it. And it changed the whole, and they've gone back to what it was. So I'm not sure whether there's appetite for failure, whether they're donor agencies or programs or organizations, institutions that are ready or are willing or genuinely committed to supporting local leadership. I think it's, for me, that was one of my observations. Since I've been appointed as a leader myself, as a team leader in balance of power. I mean, I've been fortunate that, like as I said before, that we've had the right people with the right attitude that are genuinely committed to providing that support. And I think those are critical things, that if for this to work, those are the key ingredients. They've got to be genuine about it. That's, if people make mistakes, then that's, the system should be flexible enough to be able to manage that. There's sometimes things that we understand things differently. English is not our first language. When you're saying something and you've had years of experience, we will be interpreting it another way. So and that's why I said for us, for Balance of Power, it's that ongoing learning where we need to be checking in on each other in terms of the way we do things. So to answer that question, I might be wrong, but it depends. I think this is when it depends on the people that are leading, whether the managing contractor or the donor agencies. Sometimes you're lucky if you have the right people there that, as I said, they are committed to it and they are open to having discussions, and they'll take this on as a learning, but they learn and review and adapt to see how they can continue that support. Do you feel there's growing space to acknowledge failure in the sector? For us with Balance of Power, I think we've always said it's about the framing. Do you want to frame it as a failure, or do you want to frame it as a learning? We make mistakes all the time, but how do you frame it so that you're able to share those learnings, and you take those learnings on, and it shapes the way we need to adapt to continue to be relevant and to be effective in the work that we do. So I'm just going to put it there. I'm just going to share it to the rest of the panel if they want to contribute to that question.
Thanks, Mary. I might just have a stab at this. I think this question could almost be asked in two parts of different stakeholders in development. We could ask someone like DFAT, is there space to acknowledge failure in the sector? We could ask this of managing contractors. We could ask this of development programs, of agencies. But I think there's also another question that needs to be asked. Is there appetite to acknowledge and learn from Pacific Islanders' failure? Whether it's at DFAT, managing contractors, or organizations. I've spoken about this earlier, that sometimes when a white expat will make a mistake, it's glossed over, but you need a Pacific Island staff, a junior staff, to make a small mistake, and the career is not necessarily ruined, but it'll certainly affect their prospects within the sector. So I think there needs to be a conscious acknowledgement that failure, a certain degree of failure needs to be accepted in programming, whether it's made by an expat or by a local, and that there shouldn't be those repercussions that are disproportionate to the failure. If we look at examples across the globe, across different sectors, people have had to fail in order to eventually succeed at something. And I think this is also a bit of a catch as well. If we don't allow people to fail, when will they ever learn and then be able to lead? And if you don't give them the opportunity to lead, how will that ever happen? I don't know that there's a clear answer to this, but I think it's a good question for people to reflect on their own as well, is what appetite do I have to acknowledge or work with failure within the organizations I work with? And do I set a different bar for white failure and a different bar for Pacific failure?
There's a question here that a few people have voted on. To what extent have Black Lives Matter and decolonisation of knowledge movements played a role in shifting this debate? I asked this question of the 14 people I interviewed last year, and most of them, was really fascinating, said, look, Black Lives Matter is interesting. It's a point of triangulation for us, but fundamentally, that's not our experience. We live in our own countries. We've never experienced that same environment. We might discuss it socially with our friends, but it doesn't have particular impact in our professional space. That was the recurrent theme in the interviews, but what do you guys think about that?
I mean, it's an ongoing issue. I think the points that have been highlighted by my fellow panelists is that this isn't something that, this issue of the recognition of the value of Pacific capability and how that's treated within development programming and projects. I think the Black Lives Matter movement continues to highlight a lot of the very similar undercurrents that we experience as Pacific practitioners and experts, and I'll probably use that reference. But it's again, it comes back to context and recognizing that the context of Pacific capability and expertise and its application and its recognition is something that is embedded within a host of very complex and diverse working arrangements. It's not just one particular donor's ways of working that we are confronting and that we are being confronted with. There's a host of different donors. There's a host of different development actors, external actors, who bring their own ways of thinking, are driven by a host of their own political and nuanced drivers to be seen to be supporting the Pacific. I think what we are trying to highlight is that of equal to that, if not better, is Pacific capability and Pacific context, and an understanding and valuing of what Pacific context looks like, and how then to institutionalize that across the ways that different donor agencies and programs seek to invest and engage in the Pacific. And so, I mean, I'll speak to my experience at the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat. A number of years ago, there was this process of a peer review that looked at the systems of government and donors in their interaction with each other. And one of the things that the evidence was telling us was that while there was this appetite and this shared ambition for behavior change around these international principles of good practice, it was shown that Pacific governments had moved much further and much quicker in reforming their systems to meet international principles of good practice compared to the donors. And a large part of that was because there were political drivers that framed the nature of donors' development interaction and engagement in the Pacific. And also it came back to just trusting the reforms that Pacific governments were doing in improving their own systems to manage and deliver a range of complex and diverse expectations around the delivery of all this different donor money. So it's an issue that I think fundamentally it's not a very difficult issue to address and make changes around behavior and structure. But if we're not highlighting what the impact of the unwillingness or the inability of external donors and expatriates to make those structural and behavioral shifts, then we find ourselves back on these panels continuously highlighting and talking about these issues over and over again.
Thanks. I'd like to just add to what Alfred said, and really, I mean, those structural shifts, I think, absolutely need to take place. I'd like to also add, in reference to the question about the impact of Black Lives Matter, or BLM. For me, I think there are real commonalities between what's happening with the Black Lives Matter movement and what happens in the Pacific. For me, it's really about those two common themes of both privilege and fragility. Sometimes Pacific Islanders are excluded from decision-making spaces within development programs. And sometimes when you challenge that call about exclusion, the fragility of certain people, means that you back away from that. And that speaks to the reticence of Pacific Islanders to sometimes engage in these robust conversations. So for me, I certainly think that there are clear links between our experiences in development, well, and other sectors as well, but certainly links between what's happening with BLM and what we encounter as well in our work. Sometimes we find that we're excluded from spaces. It may not be ostensibly about your color so much, but as Alfred said, sometimes there are. I mean, I've worked in an organization where they've said that this role is meant for someone who's got these particular credentials. That automatically eliminates Pacific Islanders from that, from the race. And that's a real privilege that we've also got to fight against, when we're doing this work. The fragility, as I mentioned earlier, really speaks to our ability to be able to engage in these robust conversations and not to be shot down because you're speaking to someone's weak spot or Achilles heel. Whether it's about the opportunities they've had, whether they draw people to them automatically as a result of the color of their skin. They're able to speak with authority and people listen and do as instructed as well. I think these are just two of a number of commonalities I think that we have with BLM, but it's an ongoing challenge. We work against, in some ways, these structural challenges, but then there's also the behavioral. Once you've overcome or started, breaking down those structural barriers, there's still the behavioral ones that you have to work through as well.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yes, can I just quickly add to Peni?
Oh, please, La, yes. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, in terms of having those robust conversations, also, I feel like sometimes as Pacific Islanders, we also come on a range or a continuum where you'll have some very assertive Pacific Islanders that can push back and sort of recognize when, it could be some undertones of racism. But I think majority by default setting, we tend to be more accommodating. We haven't come to the point where we're okay, to even recognize that there could be elements of racism in how, management, or they could be dealing with us in a particular way, and we probably just don't recognize it. Also because we are part of the context, we're here in our own countries, we don't necessarily be we don't expect to be dealing with racism in our own countries that we are all kind of indigenous to. So I think that kind of, the differences in the context is also something that we don't expect to be dealing with racism, but in actual fact, it could very well be an element of that. And so we hope we don't have to get to the stage where we have to be fighting to have our own, to be valued in our own context, just making reference to the BLM movement and all of that. It's really, like I said, by default setting, we're kind of, I don't know, I'm not going to say, we're not like Peni, where Peni would probably be more assertive and really call out some of these elements. We'll probably be kind of, I just wanted to add that to the conversation. Right, Peni?
Poor Penny. This is taking the fire for everybody. But it's an issue, right? Various people talk to me about getting tagged with the label of the troublesome Pacific Islander. Like if you're going to be the one that is willing to speak out like that, even I've got colleagues who say that even their Pacific colleagues don't want to be too close to that, because even being too close to the difficult Pacific Islander that's making the noise can fill people with kind of fear for the implications of that. Look, I think we've been told we can go to 5 past. So one more question here that a few people have upvoted. Given the prevalence of church-based agencies in the Pacific, are there specific pros and cons of church network connections alongside development work with regard to empowering local leaders and institutions? So do faith-based development programs or faith-based organisations do better in empowering local leaders and institutions? That's my interpretation of that question, Colin. I hope that's appropriate. Quick answer to this one from the panel, and then we'll finish up.
Well, I'll just have a go. I think it's the way the church system is structured. There's that level of, from my own understanding, there's that level of respect amongst their peers across the globe with World Council of Churches and all that. This is just observing the way the Pacific Conference of Churches operate and even the local churches operate. So there's that, if I'm reading it correctly, Yeshe, providing support to the local level leadership, I think it operates well in the local, in the church, in faith-based organizations. At the same time, I think there are programs that go through the church, funded by external donors, and I find that they are quite flexible with the way they give the local leaders, churches, absolute authority in terms of the way the money is spent, where the different development programs, and there's that level of understanding and respect. So I think that's my understanding of the church level, church faith-based organizations supporting local level leadership.
Thanks, Marianne. Look, I think we were told we could go till 5 past, which is just about now. I just want to extend a huge thank you to the 4 of you. I know this topic is not an easy one to discuss, and you're going out on a bit of a limb in being willing to put this out there in the public space. So I really admire all of you for being willing to do that, and thank you so much for offering all of your knowledge and insight on this particular topic. And thanks to everyone who's joined us and for your questions. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks, everyone.